In this video, we'll discuss what it means to take the square root of a number and how to evaluate various square roots. So to start, let's talk about what it means to take the square root of a number. So we're asked, what is the square root of a number? And in short, taking the square root of a number is the opposite of squaring it. So whenever we think about taking a square root, we're going to rely on what we know about numbers that are perfect squares. So let's take an example. Let's take a number that is a perfect square, like 16. And if we take the square root of 16, then we're going to ask ourselves, what number gives us 16 when it's squared? And that number is 4. So the square root of 16 is 4, as 4 squared is 16. Now, as we look at this, anytime we take the square root of a number and the number itself was a perfect square, we should get a positive integer as an answer. What this means then is that knowing which numbers are perfect squares will be really helpful. So knowing which numbers are perfect squares so like 1, 4, 9, 16, etc. is really helpful in these calculations. If we were to think of something like the square root of 17, let's take that. There's not a lot we can do with this number. The square root of 17 is just going to be something we'll learn is known as an irrational number. So the most that we could do is take a calculator and approximate that. And when I input the square root of 17 into a calculator, I get approximately 4.123. And if I think about that, it should be slightly larger than 4, as the square root of 16 was 4. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is evaluate a handful of square roots. Now, most of these here are all the square roots of perfect squares. So if we look at these, we have the square root of 0, and we know that 0, when we multiply it by itself or take 0 squared, will be 0. So the square root of 0 is going to be the number 0. The square root of 1, similarly, going to just be 1. Now, the square root of 4 is going to be 2, and again, that's because 2 squared gives us 4. Square root of 9 will be 3. The square root of 16, we've done that one already, will be 4. The square root of 25 will give us 5. The square root of 36 will be 6. The square root of 49 will be 7. The square root of 64 will be 8. The square root of 81 will just be 9. The square root of 100 will be 10. And now we have this last one. There's one more point we want to look at with square roots. This one is the square root of negative 4. So to calculate this, we would need a number that gave us negative 4 when we squared it. Now there's no real number that's going to end up negative when we square it. So the square root of negative 4 is simply undefined. And I'll write my justification below that no number is negative 4 after it's squared. So after it is squared. And that'll be true, that undefined part, that will be true if we try and take the square root of any negative number. We can't take the square root of a negative number for that property, that when we multiply a number by itself, it ends up positive. So we can't take the square root of a negative number. Those will always be undefined.